Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about session 10 and we're going to jump right in. I'm just going to give you a heads up. This first response from Ra is pretty long. We're going to start talking about Maldek and the transition of those souls to planet Earth, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. I communicate now. Questioner. I think it would clarify things for us to go back to the time just before the transfer of souls from Maldek, see how the Law of One operated with respect to this transfer and why this was necessary. What happened to Maldek, or the people on Maldek, to cause them to lose their planet? How long ago did this occur? I am Ra. The peoples of Maldek had a civilization somewhat similar to that of the societal complex known to you as Atlantis, in that it gained much technological information and used it without care for the preservation of their sphere, following to a majority extent the complex of thought, ideas, and actions which you may associate with your so-called negative polarity or the service to self. This was, however, for the most part, couched in a sincere belief/thought structure, which seemed to the perception of the mind-body complexes of this sphere to be positive and of service to others. The devastation that racked their biosphere and caused its disintegration resulted from what you call war. The escalation went to the furthest extent of the technology this social complex had at its disposal in the space-time present of the then time. This time was approximately 705,000 of your years ago. The cycles had begun much, much earlier upon this sphere due to its relative ability to support the first-dimensional life forms at an earlier point in the space-time continuum of your solar system. These entities were so traumatized by this occurrence that they were in what you might call a social complex knot or tangle of fear. Some of your time passed. No one could reach them. No beings could aid them. Approximately 600,000 of your years ago, the then existing members of the Confederation were able to deploy a social memory complex and untie the knot of fear. The entities were then able to recall that they were conscious. This awareness brought them to the point upon what you would call the lower astral planes, where they could be nurtured until each mind-body-spirit complex was able finally to be healed of this trauma, to the extent that each entity was able to examine the distortions it had experienced in the previous life/illusion complex. After this experience of learned teaching, the group decision was to place upon itself a type of what you may call karma alleviation. For this purpose, they came into incarnation within your planetary sphere in what were not acceptable human forms. This, then, they have been experiencing until the distortions of destruction are replaced by distortions towards the desire for a less distorted vision of service to others. Since this was the conscious decision of the great majority of those beings in the Maldek experience, the transition to this planet began approximately 500,000 of your years ago, and the type of body complex available at that time was used. So, here we have the history of Maldek, essentially. Firstly, some of the dates, the time frames Ra gives here, they give a different time frame later in session 21. So, these numbers, these hundreds of thousands of years ago, are approximate. I don't think Ra ever explicitly says, oh, we made a mistake, because they do that sometimes, where they catch that they made a mistake in their mathematical approximation of how many years have passed. But here, these are really big numbers. But approximately 700,000 years ago, Maldek blew up its entire planet. They, however, believed that they were being of service to others in their distortions, despite being service to self in their distortions. So this caused intense confusion among its entities, and that's what led to war, and then that war escalated to the point where the entire biosphere was completely destroyed. And so every being who was a part of that social memory complex, that potential social memory complex, because they obviously did not make it into fourth density, became tied up in a knot or tangle of fear and were unable to do anything. They weren't able to start incarnating again. They weren't able to find another planet. They needed intensive healing and the Confederation helped with that. The Confederation worked really hard, and they were able to loosen this knot, and then they were able to start giving healing and teaching to these beings to help them honestly conceptualize the distortions that they were experiencing in their social complex. So then 500,000 years ago, they started incarnating on Earth. They agreed collectively to incarnate in second density form to learn some lessons of service, be it service to self or service to others. They wanted to be service to others. That's the thing. They sincerely wanted to serve others. They were just very confused. So then they underwent these incarnations in second density form without the ability to create weapons of war, without the ability to create things that could destroy the entire biosphere, and that way they could hopefully learn a less distorted conception of service to others through that experience. And Dawn's going to ask more about this, and Ra's going to talk more about this too. So in 10.2, Dawn asks, was the body complex available at that time what we refer to as the ape type? And Ra says that is correct. And 10.3, Dawn asks, and have any of the Maldek entities transformed now? Are they still second density, or are they forming some third density planet now? And Ra says, the consciousness of these entities has always been third density. The alleviation mechanism was designed by the placement of this consciousness in second-dimensional physical chemical complexes, which are not able to be dexterous or manipulative to the extent which is appropriate to the workings of the third-density distortions of the mind complex. So, that's what I had said before. They took on second-density forms, still being third-density consciousness, but unable then to create weapons of mass destruction. So that gave them some time and opportunities to unlearn their destructive tendencies and to learn a more cooperative, cohesive version of service to others. So, 10.4, questioner, well, have any of these bodies moved on now, made a, shall we say, graduation at the end of a 75,000-year cycle and gotten out of the second density body into third density type bodies? I am Ra. Many of these entities were able to remove the accumulation of what you call karma, thus being able to accept a third density cycle within a third density body. Most of those beings so succeeding have incarnated elsewhere in the creation for the succeeding cycle in third density. As this planet reached third density, some few of these entities became able to join the vibration of this sphere in the third density form. There remain a few who have not yet alleviated through the mind-body-spirit coordination of distortions the previous actions taken by them. Therefore, they remain. So this one is saying that there are a few who are still in second density form, still working to alleviate their karma. Most of them have done that, but the majority of them didn't do that before we started our 75,000-year cycle. So once Earth started the 75,000-year cycle, there were some Maldekian beings who were able to join our third density cycle. However, others were too late to start their cycle at that time, so they moved on to another planetary sphere, and they're doing third density elsewhere right now. So Dawn asks, are these the Bigfoot that you spoke of? And Ra says, I am Ra, these are one type of Bigfoot. Then Dawn asks, then our present race is formed of a few who originally came from Maldek and quite a few who came from Mars. Are there entities here from other places? I am Ra. There are entities experiencing your time-space continuum who have originated from many, many places, as you would call them, in the creation, for when there is a cycle change, those who must repeat then find a planetary sphere appropriate for this repetition. It is somewhat unusual for a planetary mind-body-spirit complex to contain those from many, many various loci. But this explains much, for, you see, you are experiencing the third-dimensional occurrence with a large number of those who must repeat the cycle. The orientation, thus, has been difficult to unify, even with the aid of many of your teach learners. So, I find this to be a very interesting point. about our current third density experience. We have many third density beings repeating their cycle here, including 2 from our own solar system that destroyed their planet. And Ross says here that this orientation has been difficult to unify even with the aid of many of your teach learners. So I think this is them saying that maybe even the incidence of wanderers incarnating on our planet is higher than is usual in third density because of all of the different third density repeaters who have come to our planet. But it makes a lot of sense when you zoom out and you look at our planet and how we have so many different cultures that even as we become a more global civilization have a lot of friction in integrating with each other. I think it's a kind of subconscious instinctual resistance to the other that is really difficult to overcome because they've actually come from, some of them have come from our sublogos, our sun, but many of them have come from other suns and stars. So they have different archetypal minds, they have had different planetary experiences. There maybe are others who have destroyed their planetary sphere like Mars and Maldek did. Ra never goes into too many details. They do talk about Deneb later in the session, actually, so we will cross that bridge when we get there, I suppose. But yeah, our planet is unique in that way. Not completely unique, probably. Ra says it is somewhat unusual for a planetary mind-body-spirit complex to contain those from many, many various loci, but this explains much. So it does explain a lot, I think. So 10.7, Dawn asks, when Maldek was destroyed, did all people of Maldek have the problem, or were some advanced enough to transfer to other planets? I am Ra. In the occurrence of planetary dissolution, none escaped, for this is an action which redounds to the social complex of the planetary complex itself. None escaped the knot or the tangle. So, as we're moving into fourth density, that's what builds the actual consciousness of a planetary sphere. So, the collective societal complex of a peoples on a planet is very much intertwined with the planet itself. And so, if the social complex destroys its own planet, that is something that affects everybody who is a part of that social complex. Because in one way or another, your fate is tied. Essentially, your fate is tied together. So, yeah, every person on Maldek was in this knot, this tangle of fear. So, 10.8, questioner, is there any danger of this happening to Earth at this time? I am Ra. We feel this evaluation of your planetary mind-body-spirit complex's so-called future may be less than harmless. We say only the conditions of mind exist for such development of technology and such deployment. It is the distortion of our vision/understanding that the mind and spirit complexes of those of your people need orientation, rather than the toys needing dismantlement, for are not all things that exist part of the Creator? Therefore, freely to choose is your honor duty. So that's a kind of ominous response from Ra, but I think we all are pretty aware of that potential because we have the weapons to destroy our planetary complex. We have enough nuclear weapons that we could destroy our entire planetary complex and our entire species, and that's really unfortunate. But here Ra's saying that the more that we individually do the work of appreciating our planetary complex and relinquishing our desire to see this type of event come to pass. I know as a child of the 80s and 90s that we were very much given many opportunities as far as media goes to feed into the idea of an apocalypse, to feed into this, and part of that is the subconsciousness of the Martians and the Maldekians, but also there was a romantic kind of tinge to this idea, right? Maybe some of you know what I'm talking about. Maybe it still exists in media. I don't know. I don't watch a ton of modern media. I still watch old media if I watch media, but I think it's a good idea. I think this is one example of how it's a good idea to be careful of the things that we use our imagination for, because when we fantasize about these potentials, we are in a way offering our free will to those potentials, when really we need to each individually resist that, if that makes sense. That's my belief. I think it's really a good practice to just be aware of the thoughts in our mind. Obviously, this is one of the most important things you can do, is meditate so you can recognize and pay attention to the thoughts that you're thinking. And again, it's very normal, I think, unfortunately, in our social memory complex to feel those feelings. And I only say unfortunately because here Ross says that we do have these potentials to destroy our planet. So the more we think of potentials of the future where we get past these desires for these kinds of cataclysmic, apocalyptic sort of scenarios, I think any work done in that arena is valuable for our social memory complex. That's just my take on what Ross says here, mingled with a little bit of my own opinion based upon what Ross says here. So anyway, just something to think about. I know there are sects of Christianity that believe we need some sort of apocalyptic event, and that's what's actually going to bring fourth density Christ back to our planet. And I think there is some overlay in the New Age community that also believes that we're going to have some sort of cataclysmic event that's going to wipe out all of third density, and then fourth density will be able to rise up. But that's not how it will go if that's what happens. It'll be more like Maldek, where we'll all have to go and repeat our third density cycles again and not actually make it to fourth density. So, as everything I say, just something to think about if you want to. You don't have to think about it or agree with me in any way, but the potentials exist. So, in 10.9, Dawn asks, when a graduation occurs and an entity or entities move at the end of a cycle from one planet to another, by what means do they go from one planet to the other? And you may notice here, Dawn is asking again about how do we move these souls and vehicles from one planet to another? Are there spaceships? And Ra says, I am Ra. In the scheme of the Creator, the first step of the mind-body-spirit totality beingness is to place its mind-body-spirit complex distortion in the proper place of love-light. This is done to ensure proper healing of the complex and eventual attunement with the totality beingness complex. This takes a variable length of your time-space. After this is accomplished, the experience of the cycle is dissolved and filtered until only the distillation of distortions in its pure form remains. At this time, the harvested mind-body-spirit totality beingness evaluates the density needs of its beingness and chooses the more appropriate new environment for either a repetition of the cycle or a moving forward into the next cycle. This is the manner of harvesting, guarded and watched over by many. So essentially, and Ra goes into detail about this at other places, when we die, the totality beingness of ourselves, the seventh density self, places us within the proper distortion of love light where we can heal and evaluate our catalyst. We process all of the things that have come to pass, and then we filter all of those experiences down to their basic distortions. And then, after that process is done, the mind-body-spirit totality evaluates the entity to see if they need to go back to third density or go forward into fourth density. And again, Ross says this takes variable amounts of time because I think for some beings it's much more obvious that they crossed that threshold. For others, there's a much more elaborate weighing of events. It's not totally a simple thing, especially at the end of the cycle when the harvest actually happens. Then all of this processing of experience of the previous 75,000 years happens. And so after that, the decision is then made. Does this individualized entity move forward, or do they need to try these lessons again? So in 10.10, Dawn asks, when the entity is moved from one planet to the next, is he moved in thought or in a vehicle? again, trying to get the answer that Don was asking in 10.9, being more explicit with what he wanted. Ra says, I am Ra. The mind, body, spirit, totality, beingness is one with the Creator. There is no time-space distortion. Therefore, it is a matter of thinking the proper locus in the infinite array of time spaces. So, there is no actual physical movement from one sphere to the next, or any of that. It's just all done by thought in time-space by the mind, body, spirit, totality, who is one with the Creator and can therefore think where it wants to be and what it wants to do and how it wants to move things around. So, 10.11, questioner. While an entity is incarnate in this third density at this time, he may either learn without consciously knowing what he's doing, or he may learn after he is consciously aware that he is learning in the ways of the law of one. The second way, it is possible for the entity to greatly accelerate his growth. Is not this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. And I personally believe that those are the beings who the law of one is actually for. Those who want to accelerate their growth. That's why the law of responsibility exists so heavily in this material, because there is so much information to integrate and learn and to take into our being. And because I believe this information resonates the most deeply with wanderers, those who have mostly come from sixth density and have already gone through those steps of harvest from third to fourth, fourth to fifth, fifth to sixth, and learned a lot of those lessons. We just really need to penetrate the forgetting and then do the work that allows us to integrate these teachings and accelerate our consciousness, which just gives us so much more awareness, right? It allows us to pierce the veils so that we aren't as confused. We're always going to be confused because we're always going to be veiled, but we can pierce the veil more and more and more and more, so our perspective, our vantage point gets wider and things don't seem so heavy and we don't feel so lost. We can sort of place ourselves in a context that makes sense through these teachings. So, 10.12, questioner. Then, although many entities are not aware of this, what they really desire is to accelerate their growth, and it is their job to discover this while incarnate. Is it correct that they can accelerate their growth much more while incarnate in third density than in between incarnations of this density? I am Ra. This is correct. We shall attempt to speak upon this concept. The law of one has as one of its primal distortions the free will distortion. Thus, each entity is free to accept, reject, or ignore the mind-body-spirit complexes about it and ignore the creation itself. There are many among your social memory complex distortion who, at this time-space, engage daily, as you would put it, in the working upon the law of one in one of its primal distortions, that is, the ways of love. However, if this same entity, being biased from the depths of its mind-body-spirit complex towards love-light, were then to accept responsibility for each moment of the time-space accumulation of present moments available to it, such an entity can empower its progress in much the same way as we described the empowering of the call of your social complex distortion to the Confederation. So here what Ra is saying is that each moment that we seek contains the potential to double upon itself. So every moment that you look for love is doubling your desire to look for love. And so every time you put that desire out there, you engage with that desire that's in the depths of your being, because I don't think you'd be listening to this right now if it wasn't. You double your potential. It just keeps building and building and building upon itself. And so I think that's one of the most important aspects about building polarity, is that dedication to building the same polarity over and over and over, because as soon as you activate the desire to ignore the mind-body-spirit complexes around you, or to reject the mind-body-spirit complexes around you, you stop that process of doubling the other, of acceptance. I think it's also interesting too, however, if this same being, by being biased from the depths of its mind-body-spirit complex towards love-light, were then to accept responsibility for each moment, I do think in a way that is Ra saying that Ra is talking about wanderers there, being biased towards love, light, light, love. Those are 6th density concepts. Love is 4th density, light is 5th density. If you're trying to learn the balance of both, that's likely because you have originally come from 6th density. And now we could talk forever about wanderers and the identity of being a wanderer and how that itself can cause a lot of distortions in a person, and especially like in the yellow ray, and that alone can cause rejection of other selves or a feeling of being elite, both of which are negatively biased. But I do think in a lot of ways it is helpful just to have a mythology of the self that has context that can be worked upon. And so if you feel like you might be a wanderer, or if you feel like for sure you know that you are a wanderer, that puts in context that you have a mission, that you came here to do something, even if that's just radiating love and light, even if it's nothing specific, even if you just came with a desire to serve in whatever possible way presents itself to you. That is an honor, duty, responsibility, and there's so much power in that. For a 6th density being to come back into 3rd density, to try to help, even confused and lost, and maybe won't ever become aware of this potential to accelerate their consciousness. But once you do become aware of your potential status as a wanderer and the potential to greatly accelerate the evolution of your consciousness, that becomes your responsibility to somehow find a way to work that into your 3rd density life. And that takes a while. I mean, it's not like you can just find this and then wake up the next day and be a completely different being. You have the accumulation of all of your humanness to deal with too. So again, honor, duty, responsibility. It could be on bad days look as a burden, feel like a burden, but truly we have come to help. And there are many of us, and we all have our own individual ways of expressing ourselves. And anything that we can do to just put a little bit more love here and there, even just looking for love, finding the love in the moment. These things are all so helpful at this very critical time where we're trying to harvest into 4th density, but things are pretty wonky. And 4th density is being, quote unquote, fetched with some inconvenience. So anything that you can do to help tip the scales, I'm grateful for every attempt you make in doing that. And you should also be grateful and even proud that you get the opportunity to do so. When you can reach out of the darkness with your own free will to see the love, it's the hardest thing. But again, the more that you do that, the easier it becomes. That's what Ra means when they say an entity can empower its progress in much the same way as we describe the empowering of the call of your social complex distortion to the Confederation. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. And sometimes it might feel like it gets harder, because you are going to test yourself. You're going to give yourself initiations. And it's just another opportunity for you to go back to sleep, essentially. These initiations are. And it's still the same thing, though. You're still searching for unity, for love, and making that choice despite whatever separation and manifestation and facts and numbers try to tell you or dissuade you from making the choice towards love. But truly, at a certain point, after a long period of time, after passing several initiations, it gets easier. It becomes automatic in a way. And Ra talks about this much later on when they're talking about the archetypal mind. The more we make that choice, the easier it becomes. It becomes automatic. And then, we throw ourselves a wrench. We test ourselves. We give ourselves this complex situation where the wrong, quote unquote, wrong choice seems so right and feels so good. And it's amazing that we can do that to ourselves, honestly. But anyway, I just want to say that I personally am grateful for anything that you do to try to fight, to resist the veil, to resist separation. It's all the good fight. So thank you. In 1013, Dawn asks, would you state in a little different way how you empower this call? I am Ra. We understand you to speak now of our previous information. The call begins with 1. This call is equal to infinity and is not, as you would say, counted. It is the cornerstone. The second call is added. The third call empowers or doubles the second, and so forth, each additional caller doubling or granting power to all the preceding call. Thus, the call of many of your peoples is many, many powered and overwhelmingly heard to the infinite reaches of the one creation. So, this is Ra just explaining again how the doubling works. Every single time one is added to the previous call, to the previous intention, the call towards love, it doubles. So it's not just 1 plus 1 or 10 plus 1 or whatever. It just keeps doubling over and over. So in 1014, Dawn asks, for the general development of the reader of this book, could you state some of the practices or exercises to perform to produce an acceleration toward the law of one? I am Ra. Exercise 1. This is the most nearly centered and usable within your illusion complex. The moment contains love. That is the lesson/goal of this illusion or density. The exercise is to consciously seek that love in awareness and understanding distortions. The first attempt is the cornerstone. Upon this choosing rests the remainder of the life experience of an entity. The second seeking of love within the moment begins the addition. The third seeking powers the second, the fourth powering or doubling the third. As with the previous type of empowerment, there will be some loss of power due to flaws within the seeking and the distortion of insincerity. However, the conscious statement of self to self of the desire to seek love is so central an act of will that, as before, the loss of power due to this friction is inconsequential. Exercise 2. The universe is one being. When a mind-body-spirit complex views another mind-body-spirit complex, see the Creator. This is an helpful exercise. Exercise 3. Gaze within a mirror. See the Creator. Exercise 4. Gaze at the creation which lies about the mind-body-spirit complex of each entity. See the Creator. The foundation or prerequisite of these exercises is a predilection towards what may be called meditation, contemplation, or prayer. With this attitude, these exercises can be processed. Without it, the data will not sink down into the roots of the tree of mind, thus enabling and ennobling the body and touching the spirit. So, this is a great portion of the material, right? It's very workable. And again, each time you do these things, it doubles upon itself. Each time you seek love in the moment, see all other selves as the Creator, see yourself as the Creator, and see the creation around you as the Creator. Every time you desire to do that and then follow through with that, doubles upon itself. And even Ross says that you may not have total sincerity when you do this. You may just be going through the actions. But the desire to do so is so central that it still builds that momentum, right? And so I'll say for exercise 1, the moment contains love. I can tell you that one way that my husband personally transformed his way of looking at the experience is just literally always looking for the silver lining in an event that happens. Just finding, even if it's a stretch, trying to find a way that there is a benefit from whatever bad has happened, whatever that we perceive as bad happening has happened. So that's one way to find love in the moment. Just recognize that it may be obscured, it may be barely visible, but it's still there. Even in the confusion, even in the suffering, love still exists. It's distorted, but it exists. And then obviously, see everyone else as the Creator. Everyone else is just a portion of you. It's easy to forget that when we're all going about our daily lives in our meat suits. But each person you see is a part of yourself. And actively engaging in that exercise is helpful. And then the third one, gazing into a mirror and seeing the Creator. Look at yourself. Accept who you are. Accept what you look like. Accept how other people see you. Accept and be aware of the fact that when you look into a mirror, you're not even seeing yourself. This is something that I've thought of as very interesting. When you look into a mirror, you're seeing your reflection. You're seeing an inversion of yourself, even. You're literally not seeing the same person that everyone else sees. And that's important because our brains are so hardwired to look at faces and facial expressions and to respond to very minute changes in how the muscles of the face are conforming in a certain way to communicate mood and interior feelings. And when you look at yourself in the mirror, you're seeing a complete flip-flop. And so when you look in the mirror, just remember that that isn't even you, but it's still the creator. And it is still you, but it isn't even what everyone else sees. That's something that often tickles the expansion of my own brain and how I perceive reality. So, and then the fourth one is to just look around you and see the creator in everything. I see the creator in my half-drink smoothie that's sitting next to me. I see my creator in the fluff of dog fur from my husky that's on the floor. I see the creator in the beautiful mountain that's half shadow, half light outside of my window. I see the creator in the birds that are flying by. Just everywhere that you can see the creator, that's a really powerful thing to do. All of these things are really important, but then, of course, Ra finishes by saying that you really need to have a meditation practice for these exercises to really work, to do that doubling, to build upon themselves, to filter through your mind and your spirit, or to filter through your mind and to touch your body and your spirit. So the more you practice these exercises along with meditation, the more you transform the way you view your reality. So 10:15, we get another long historical answer from Ra, from Dawn's question. And Dawn's question is, questioner, I was wondering about the advent of the civilization called Atlantis and Lemuria, the way these civilizations occurred, and where did they come from? I am Ra. This is the last question of this work. The civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria were not one, but two. Let us look first at the Mu entities. They were beings of a somewhat primitive nature, but those who had very advanced spiritual distortions. The civilization was part of this cycle, experienced early within the cycle at a time of your approximately 53000, 53,000 of your years ago. It was an helpful and harmless place, which was washed beneath the ocean during a readjustment of your sphere's tectonic plates through no action of their own. They set out those who survived and reached many places in what you call Russia, North America, and South America. The Indians, of whom you have come to feel some sympathy in your social complex distortions, are the descendants of these entities. Like the other incarnates of this cycle, they came from elsewhere. However, these particular entities were largely drawn from a second-density planet which had some difficulty, due to the age of its sun, in achieving third-density life conditions. This planet was from the galaxy Deneb. The Atlantean race was a very conglomerate social complex which began to form approximately 31000, 31,000 years in the past of your space-time continuum illusion. It was a slow-growing and very agrarian society until approximately 15000, 15,000 of your years ago. It reached quickly a high technological understanding which caused it to be able to use intelligent infinity in a less informative manner. We may add that they used intelligent energy as well, manipulating greatly the natural influxes of the indigo or pineal ray from divine or infinite energy. Thus, they were able to create life forms. This they began to do instead of healing and perfecting their own mind-body-spirit complexes, turning their distortions towards what you may call the negative. Approximately 11,000 of your years ago, the first of the what you call wars caused approximately 40% of this population to leave the density by means of disintegration of the body. The second and most devastating of the conflicts occurred approximately 10821, 10,821 years in the past, according to your illusion. This created an earth-changing configuration, and the large part of Atlantis was no more, having been inundated. 3 of the positively oriented of the Atlantean groups left this geographical locus before that devastation, placing themselves in the mountain areas of what you call Tibet, what you call Peru, and what you call Turkey. Do you have any brief questions before we close this meeting? So here's Ra's history of Atlantis and Lemuria, which I'm having trouble saying, so forgive me. Lemuria. It's not rolling off my tongue, I apologize. So Lemuria was a civilization that did have a sinking of its landmass, but it wasn't because of their own personal distortions. It was just a readjustment of the Earth's tectonic plates, and they relocated in Russia, North America, and South America. Ross says that the Native Americans are descendants of these beings and that they came from Deneb. Their planet made it through second density, but they were unable to achieve third density life conditions because of the age of its sun. So, as beings were harvested from second density from this Denebian planet, they came to Earth, and they are considered the Mu entities of our mythological past. Once their continent sunk, they spread out into Russia and North and South America, and they continued to be, Ross says that they were somewhat primitive with very advanced spiritual distortions, which is, I think, how we think of the Native Americans in a lot of ways. We were talking about this just recently here in my Discord group, about how it's really interesting that we see the Native Americans as some of the most spiritual and in touch with our planetary sphere. And it's ironic because this isn't even their native planetary sphere. So they came from a different planetary sphere, but still took such good care of their new sphere in a way that those of us who are actually native to this sphere or even the solar system have been unable to really conceptualize and do. So that's just kind of ironic and interesting. But, Ross says that these were the descendants of the Mu entities. I think it's important to recognize that, especially right now, I do think that there is some racial lines in incarnating. I think some, like Denebians, would still be incarnating in Native American bodies, but I think depending on how people's karma is, they might be incarnating, crossing racial lines in some ways. I don't know. That's just something to think about. I'm not saying that every Native American is a descendant of the Mu entities who came from Deneb. I don't know if that's necessarily true at this current point in space and time, especially since Ross says that they are the descendants of the Mu entities. I think they are saying that they are the descendants of the entities who lived in Lemuria. Then Atlantis, however, was a group that gained a lot of technological knowledge, but they used it for separation instead of harmony. Instead of healing themselves, they started making new life forms, and I think we are playing with those potentials right now in our social memory complex. We have a lot of medical technology and scientific technology, but we aren't giving it away as freely as we could be, especially in the United States. It costs a lot of money to get access to medical and scientific technology, when really, if there was more of a desire to serve others, that would be given out much more freely, and we would be really working hard to heal ourselves and each other, and to make those beings who are already incarnated healthier and stronger, instead of playing with these ideas of making, and not to step on anyone's toes, but I also think that includes artificial intelligences. I think a lot of people are putting a lot of time and energy into creating and perfecting quote-unquote artificial intelligence, when we have a lot of work to do perfecting the creation of third density yet, because there are a lot of ill people. There's a lot of people who could have a much better quality of life if they just had access to some of the medical and scientific technology that we have available. So, just something to think about, I think. But they ended up destroying their continent, and then there were 3 positively oriented Atlantean groups, and they moved on to Tibet, Peru, and Turkey. So that's where the descendants of the Atlantean race went. And then Ross says, do you have any brief questions before we close this meeting? In 1016, Dawn asks, only one other than what we can do to make the instrument more comfortable. I have only one other question. I would like to have brief information of the word you use, galaxy. I am Ra. We use the term known to your people by the sound vibration complex galaxy. We accept that some galaxies contain one system of planetary and solar groups, others containing several. However, the importance of the locus and infinite time-space dimensionality is so little that we accept the distortion implicit in such an ambiguous term. So, Dawn has noticed some incongruency with how Ra uses the term galaxy, and he's trying to pin down the ways that they use it. And Ra says that from our vantage point, your locus in infinite time-space dimensionality is very unimportant, essentially. So they try to use the word galaxy as we use it, but there might be some misunderstanding bridging that gap. Dawn asks, then would 9 planets and our sun we have here in our system, would you refer to that as a solar galaxy? Ra says we would not. Dawn asks how many stars approximately would be in a galaxy? And Ra says, it depends upon the galactic system. Your own, as you know, contains many, many millions of planet entities and star bodies. So they see our galaxy as the Milky Way. And that is the logos. And our sun is a sub-logos of the logos of billions of stars. So the last question, 1019, Dawn asks, I was just trying to get the definition you were using for galaxy. You mentioned them a couple of times, and it seemed to me that what you call galaxy, we call a planetary system. Is there any way to make the instrument more comfortable? I am Ra. The instrument could be made somewhat more comfortable if more support were given to the body complex. Other than this, we can only repeat the request to carefully align the symbols used to facilitate this instrument's balance. Our contact is narrow-banded, and thus the influx brought in with us must be precise. I am Ra. I leave you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator. Adonai. So, basically the same information that Ra gives at the end of each session to help Carla. She needs more support in her body complex. I think they're saying that they need to perfect the space that she lays down in to make sure that her neck, her head, her shoulders, everything is comfortable before she falls asleep. And other than this, we can only repeat the request to carefully align the symbols used to facilitate the instrument's balance. Our contact is narrow-banded, and thus the influx brought in with us must be precise. So, Dawn did ask a lot of questions again that were historical, that were just about things that have happened on our planetary sphere, trying to get context for our spiritual history, which I think is pretty understandable. But as Ra says in session 1, their teach learning is philosophical rather than historical. So these historical questions do start to deviate from the narrow band of information that they're here to send to us and offer their information through. And when Dawn deviates from their narrow band, the instrument carries the burden of the problems that come from that, essentially. So we're in session 10. Dawn really does start to get it together more and more and more. We still have some off sessions and off questions coming up here, but Dawn does a good job of recognizing his own distortions. And he does love talking to Ra so much. He's willing to try to fit his questions into what they want to be asked, and there's still plenty of questions to ask, but it is a hard job. Dawn has done a really good job of this very difficult job, and obviously the group knew that Dawn would do an adequate job. He just needs to be reminded sometimes to not get so excited about historical information, scientific information, the things that are of measure in pen that aren't nearly as important, and those things that we need to sort of move past and let go of. So that was session 10, and there is quite a bit of interesting historical information in this session. I do want to say that Ra does have to consider the free will of our planetary species, and I think when they're talking about things like Atlantis and Lemuria, that they are treading the line between reality and parable, fantasy, mythology, the things that we believe happened and what have actually happened. And so even like when Ra talks about Jesus and stuff like that, I think they have to really balance what they say and try to, again, make it more universal, less historical, less specific, and invalidating of the collective beliefs that we already have. So again, because to them it isn't really even important ultimately, but they still don't want to disturb our understanding of our history. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to all the future sessions. I think they just keep getting better and better from here, and more fun stuff to talk about, at least fun for me, and hopefully fun for you to listen to me talk about. And I'm very grateful to everyone who's listened, who's offered me any sort of encouragement, as always. Thank you, thank you. I use that to put fuel in my tank to sit down and record. So I really appreciate you, and I look forward to next time, and I will see you there.